Shaw. We'll get into Martin Shaw's sort of ideas around Christian myth, what he calls Christian mythopoetics, which I think is something that he's actually still developing to some degree. And so, yeah, we will kind of develop that along with him. For those of you that know, I attended Knox Theological Seminary, got my master's degree in Christian and classical studies, and so the idea of story, myth, myth being a wild way to tell the truth, a true story without the reliance on the facts, so to speak. So let's listen to some of Shaw's thoughts here.
Fairy tales will alert you almost immediately to what the problem is. And the problem in our story is that we have something that is generative but has run dry at the center. So we have a kingdom or a queendom where they can bless other people, but they themselves have slowly become infertile in some fashion. And I wouldn't overly literalize it into, the business of having children. Something in you is no longer generative. Many of us do that. Many of us in the caring professions end up in this irony of irony. We give to everybody else, but something is no longer generative within us, for us.
That is such a so I've been in Christian ministry for 25 years, and when Martin Shaw said this last part, it really rings true for me. Sorry, I'm going to play it again because I sort of jumped the gun here because I got excited.
Many of us do that. Many of us in the caring professions end up in this irony of irony. We give to everybody else, but something is no longer generative within us, for us.
We give to everyone else, but something is no longer generative within us, for us. He's going through the story of Tatterhood, and the king and the queen cannot have children because their room is too lofty and high up. They're no longer grounded. They're not in the midst of the polis, the people. They're not in communion. Maybe going back to trying to diagnose why Jordan Peterson has fallen off a little bit. The king and queen can't have children, so they love their kingdom, but they can't make that donation to the next generation. They can't raise up the next generation. It's because they've sort of become disconnected. But you hear this first part also about the myth. Myth, stories, fairy tales will alert you to the problem. And when I hear that, I think John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God. He was with God. All things were made through him. Not one thing that was made that has been made. In him was life. That life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness could not comprehend him or apprehend him. That's the problem of our story. That's if our life is a myth, the issue is the light has come into the darkness, but the darkness does not understand it. Now, not to spoil the story, John begins his gospel and ends his gospel with the same theme, essentially. So the word enters into the darkness can't grab a hold of him, but at the end of John's gospel, one of his followers, Mary, grabs a hold of him. She clings to him, and she comes to him at night. She comes to the grave at night, right? It says that she went to the tomb while it was still dark. It's laid in a garden, right? This is so beautiful. And she grabs a hold of him. And Jesus says, it's such a funny statement, right? But John records it for us to help us understand that Mary is no longer a part of the darkness. See, the darkness cannot apprehend the light. The darkness could not apprehend the Lord. But Jesus said to her, stop clinging to me, for I've yet to ascend to the Father, right? She comes into the darkness, but she herself is not part of the darkness. And we know that she is part of the light because now she grabs a hold of the light. And so our myth, our story, it alerts us to the problem right there. And yet again, hopefully not to spoil it. There's hope at the end. There is hope. As a Christian, I cannot think of a better way to describe the modern church in our approach to divine revelation. There is a problem that, and we risk. I don't know that we're there yet. But as a church, we risk that generative thing, that life-giving thing will dry up, just like the king and the queen, if we are not connected to one another, if we're too high. I used to work, I knew a church where the pastor, he knew exactly what time the band would end, and he would arrive right before that. He didn't come, he didn't mingle with the congregation. He would arrive, he would stand in the back for like a minute, the band would finish, and he would walk up to the stage, he would preach his sermon, and then he was unreachable. He was essentially unreachable type of person. And if we think of church that way, if we do church that way, if we treat the Bible that way, I do think that there will be, we will notice that we cannot then nourish and nurture the next generation. That there's something that will dry up, something generative that we won't have. And we see this personally. I see this personally in my own life. You have to cultivate. You have to feed on the Word of God. So there's the first bit. Many churches fail to connect to emerging generations of young people with the living Word, just as modern schools fail to inspire the thirst for knowledge. If you guys saw this clip passed around, this teacher is blaming technology only because we have forgotten that story is the first form of technology, and it is powerful for educating. So this was a teacher who is leaving. I don't know if you guys are hearing that, but I actually want to pause it. So yeah, there. I don't know why it's showing up so weird. But I don't find. I mean, it's interesting. And Cale Zeldin reposted this. Cale's also a teacher, so he found value in it, and it is valuable. But if you just listen to her, you're like, okay, clearly she doesn't know how to tell a story. And so, like, maybe that's the problem. And she does say, like, hey, we've brought technology. All these kids, they get iPods, they get iPads. What am I? Just dated myself. And so now they can't pay attention. No, they can't pay attention because they're hungry for more. And we are not giving it to them. We are not feeding them what their soul desires. And is it possible that their soul is desiring that myth, that wild way of telling the truth? True stories without relying just on the facts so that we can test you. Young people are deeply hungry to reconnect to the wisdom of the ancient past. But the older generation has failed in our duty to pass that on to them. Wall Street Ape says, this woman is a teacher of 10th grade high school America. She's leaving the profession. She says kids can no longer read proficiently. They won't pay attention. They won't listen to authority. They don't think the Declaration of Independence is important. Why? Because they can't locate themselves in the story. What does the Declaration of Independence have to do with me? How am I connected to that history, that story? If you cannot show me how I am connected to that story, then don't give it to me. They're writing their papers with AI like ChatGPT. They don't know math. They don't care about history. And yet Joe Rogan, when he does Graham Hancock episodes, they get millions of views. So yes, they do care about history. They just don't care for the system whereby they are ingesting history. They don't care for that. It has lost all myth. It has lost all storytelling. It has lost all meaning. This video goes over exactly what's going on. No, it doesn't go over exactly what's going on in high school classrooms in America. It is right in its diagnosis of the problem, but it has no prognosis. This video has no prognosis for what we do from here. She just leaves. She leaves. It's just been a really poor experience. This generation is really tough. And I will admit that I'm just not cut out for it. Okay, so and some of you guys know this. I work in student ministry. Anyone who starts now will be a teacher from here on out with a generation that we're teaching now. I commend you. One of the things I tell other student pastors is when they say, how do I get students to pay attention in Bible study? How do I get students to take seriously the Bible? How do I get students to love the Bible? My first question is always, do you love the Bible? Do you love it? If you don't feel the gospel, if you don't feel the weight of the Declaration of Independence and how it connects to your story, it will not translate to the next generation. The reason these young people are not revolting, they're rebelling. Why is this so? Oh, it's because I'm zoomed in. Anyway, I'm not gonna watch the clip because I wouldn't take a class from this lady. I just wouldn't. She's just not that interesting. I think she is rightly bringing up a true problem that we have. But I think this video goes over exactly what's going on in high school class. No, you've completely missed what's going on in high school classrooms. And I fear that the church, again, might completely miss what's going on in our student ministry. Just as Martin Shaw has told us, the myth alerts us to the problem. The center is in crisis. What do we do about that? How do we re-find community if our lives have become too separated? We're too high off the ground. That's the story of Tatterhood. Of course, Martin Shaw calls it Tatterhood. I can't do the Irish thing. So, okay, I will catch up on chat. It's good to see you guys. Thank you. If you have a question, maybe just all caps question or something like that, but I do appreciate it. I do see you guys. And I will catch up here in a second. But yeah, I think that I see the same problem in churches, but I think the church has a distinct advantage at this particular time because we have the true myth. The myth made fact, as Lou Marcos would say, or C.S. Lewis would say. He wrote the book, though. He wrote a book called that. We have the great poet and the great poetry. All right, let's get back to Martin Shaw. Otherwise, this live stream we'll be here late into the night talking about myths and poetry and stuff. Let's get back to Martin. Wait, what was my? Let me read this first, and then Martin Shaw points out that when the center is in crisis, the genius lives on the margins. The center can't fix itself. That's why knights are always leaving Camelot, and that's why to leave Camelot requires bravery. That's why Joe Rogan's podcast is popular. That's why Douglas Murray, when he speaks, it's not that popular. I don't sense that Douglas Murray is being vulnerable, that he's approaching with courage, sharing his ideas, knowing that people will be critical of him. He's sharing his ideas, saying, get in line, listen to what I have to say, I'm right. Whereas somebody like Joe Rogan, I hear a level of courage. So it will take courage. It will take courage to move out of the center. I think one theologian who I could point to right now who did this, I think, really well, was Dr. Michael Heiser. He did theology bravely, even if that meant that he did theology unconventionally. He looked at the Bible bravely, even if it meant he sometimes looked at it unconventionally. I think we'll need more theologians and more Bible teachers to do that. To journey out of the center into the wild.
We come to a fundamental truth of the mythic imagination now. When the center is in crisis, the genius lives on the margins. The information we require always comes from the edge of things. The center can't fix itself. It's why the knights are always leaving Camelot and heading off in all of these different directions. In myth, a beach is a liminal place because a beach is neither quite the land and it's neither quite the sea. The tree line is a liminal place because it's not quite the garden and it's not quite the deep forest. Storytellers, as I've said before, always exist on the hinge of things. We come to a fundamental truth of the mythic imagination now. When the center is in crisis, the genius lives on the margins.
The center is in crisis. The genius lives in the margins. Jesus did this. Jerusalem was in crisis. The temple was in crisis. The center was in crisis. And at that moment, Jesus enters into human history. And you notice that sometimes he's walking through the wilderness. Maybe not sometimes. He's often walking through the wilderness. He's not in the city. He's in the liminal space between the city and the wild. He is on a boat, on a beach, preaching to a crowd who's on land. Jesus embodies this bravery. Of course, he didn't have to leave his heavenly kingdom. He didn't have to come into proximity to our problem, our sin, our disturbance, our bewilderment. Again, in the story of Tatterhood, the king and queen they're too high up. They're up in their castle. They don't descend. Well, they do eventually in the story, but I don't want to ruin the story. You can go to Martin Shaw's channel. It's called Jawbone. It's lovely. Check it out. I took a class with Martin Shaw that was presented on the Symbolic World. You can check that out as well. I believe it's still up. The king and queen have to enter into proximity. And then what happens is something very much like the ministry of Jesus. Jesus gets into a boat. He gets onto the beach. He gets into the liminal space. He gets onto the edge of the wilderness. Again, he's not feral, but he is not domesticated either. He is a hinge person. And we, as his followers, are called to be the same. We are called to find that genius on the margins and reincorporate it into the center and re-envision the city and re-envision the town and the center. And I think Paul Vanderklay has even said this. You know, there's the communion of the saints. You know, there's the breaking of bread. You know, communion. There's the prayers. That's, you know, the Catholic Orthodox. There's the preaching of the word. That's the Protestants. And then there's this communion of the saints. What is that church like? What is that church going to be like? That's a liminal idea. That's a marginal idea. That's not really a center. That's not a whatever, you know, church, you know, normie church. Jesus was a hinged person. He joined heaven and earth. He walked in the wilderness. He would teach from the edge between the sea and the land. He was not domesticated, but neither was he wild. He is good, but he's not safe. Mark 4, 1-3. Again, he began to teach by the sea, and a very large crowd gathered around him. So he got into a boat onto the sea and sat down. And while the whole crowd was by the sea on the shore, he taught them many things in parables. And what's a parable? It's a wild way of telling the truth. It's a true story without the use of facts. It's a myth. It's a story. He taught them many things in parables, and in teaching he said to them, listen, consider the sower who went out to sow. And I think that parable in particular, Jesus will even say, if you don't understand this parable, talking about the parable of the sower, how will you understand all of the parables? So it's a parable about why he teaches in parables, which is really fascinating, but there's growth. And the idea there is that the seed is planted and it brings more fruit. That's, again, what the myth has alerted us to the problem. The problem is there's something generative at the center that is run dry. There is barrenness at the center, either of our churches or our communities or even some people's podcasts, let's say. There's something that is run dry. Jesus here is telling us that the key to understanding his parables is the key to understanding how ecology works and how things are planted, they grow. Things die, right? And they grow into more fruit. So that is generative. That's regenerative. That's a regenerative principle in Jesus's life. And this is Mike McGarry. I'll go through this thread and then I'll catch up on chat. So I'm almost through. Thank you guys for hanging in there. Let me know what you think. Again, I work in student ministry. Shout out to youth pastor theologian Mike McGarry. Again, I'll leave links to this in the description after the live stream. And sorry, I need to really learn better that is part of my live stream prep. I try to get my ideas squared away first, but I need to get like my links and stuff squared away. So let me pause this again. Bad storytelling exists in the church as much as in the culture at large. This is why young people check out at school as well as at youth group as we explore the theology of storytelling. Know that stories are a wild way of telling the truth, and God is the master storyteller. Now, I'm sort of saying this, I'm seeding this because there are going to be people in the church who hear someone say something like the Bible is poetry, and they will assume that what you're saying is the Bible is fiction, and that's not what we're saying. What we're saying when we say Bible is poetry is that God, as a poet, can say much more in a shorter space than he would if he just used prose, if he just gave us propositional theology. He gives us poetry because poetry is dense. And story is a container for revealing knowledge in its most condensed form. And God is infinite and we're finite, and so we have to master this scale problem of an infinite God revealing to finite humanity who he is. He has to use poetry. He can't just use, just the facts, ma'am,
I really hope that Marvel goes back to just good storytelling, because when storytelling is overtaken by propaganda, then it becomes bad storytelling. And I think we've seen that with like the new Snow White movie that absolutely bombed in the theaters, right? When a good story is reshaped by you just trying to force your message rather than telling a compelling story that reflects a message. God wired us for stories. So I think that there is something in here for youth workers about theology of storytelling and how we engage with the stories that our kids like to listen to.
And I think as we see it in culture, something has run dry. The Marvel movies are terrible. Disney's falling apart. Is it true of the church as well? We have become bad storytellers.
Wired us for stories.
And God has wired us for stories.
God wired us for stories. So I think that there is something in here for youth workers about theology of storytelling.
So there you go. Shout out to Mike. The theology of storytelling. That's essentially my project moving forward. And then I quote Shakespeare, the poet's eye in fine frenzy rolling doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shape and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. The word becomes flesh. The worlds were made by the word of God, so that which is seen is not made out of that which is visible. It just goes on and on and on. It's such a theme in the Bible, and it's such a shame that we've missed it. The Bible is poetry. It's not propositional theology, as I've said. God is a great poet, and he makes worlds with words. You can look at Hebrews 11:3. That's what I just quoted. Ephesians 2:10. You are his workmanship. You are his poema. John 1:1, which we've talked about. Genesis 1:3. God said, "Let there be light." God said it. Because of this, the Bible is not only true, it's the precondition for the manifestation of all truth. Now, I'm actually quoting Jordan Peterson from back in the day. This is a classic Jordan Peterson quote, but it's from his Joe Rogan interview from, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And again, we're talking about something that has something generative, something that was life-giving that has run dry. And I didn't really plan that for this live stream, but I see that, I think that might be the diagnosis for Jordan Peterson's work right now. It's just missing. It's not hitting the way it did 5 years ago or longer. When he said this on Joe Rogan's podcast, I stopped. I was walking on a trail, and I physically had to stop myself, rewind it, and I think I listened to it 3 or 4 times. The Bible is not only true, it's the precondition for the manifestation of all truth. And so here's from Dr. Warren Gage. He's the professor that taught me classics.
First, we look at the philosophic tradition primarily. Although we will read Christian texts, some of the greatest philosophers have actually been Christian, so we'll look at the way that they envision things. And the two will be in dialogue. The Bible is in the poetic tradition. And did you know that? The Bible is poetry. 1/3 of it is formal poetry, set out differently on the page. But the whole thing, even the narrative parts, are highly poetic. What does that mean, that the Bible is poetry? Well, it's constituted, it's got narrative, but it also has psalms and proverbs, doesn't it? The Song of Solomon, which is a love poem. Parts of Isaiah are war chants. The book of Revelation is a war scroll. It's Christ at war with Babylon. He causes 7 trumpets to sound. You should know the context of that. His name is Joshua. That takes you back to Jericho, where the 7 trumpets sound and the great city falls. What happens in Revelation? 7 trumpets sound and the great city falls. Revelation is simply a retelling, poetically, of the Battle of Jericho.
And we're back. I sort of fell asleep there. I don't know why it didn't replay. The other ones have been replaying. Okay. Now, I wanted to play a clip from this, and I missed it. And I totally missed it. So let me find it again. The Bible is poetry. The Bible is poetry. Now, I have this clipped out somewhere that would allow me... You know what? Maybe I did. I didn't render it. I didn't render the clip. So sometimes YouTube does not... They really doesn't like it when I play the live clip. So the Bible is poetry. Now, here's my thought. We have lost that sense that the Bible is poetry. Our sort of Christian storytelling tradition has gone away, and which is so sad because, well, I don't know why. It's just sad. We have become, so Ian McGilchrist is a great person for this conversation because he deals with the 2 hemispheres of the brain, the right brain and the left brain. The left, if I'm getting this right, is, the left is going to want to manage things. Again, we're talking about the difference between the domestic city and the wilderness, the garden, the wild, and Jesus being this sort of liminal figure between the two. I almost wonder if that same tension, that same push-pull is not seen in the 2 hemispheres of our brain, the left and the right. We need both. But if the left becomes too dominant, which McGilchrist's thesis is that we live in a left brain dominant society where we just want to manage and control things. We want to understand them and grasp them. Again, as we teach the Bible to young people, as the English teacher in that clip from Wall Street Apes is saying, I can't teach these kids. As we go into this left brain dominant culture where we just want the facts, we have abandoned the abstract, the intuition, the myth, the left and the right brain communicating to each other. Now, it's really interesting. Martin's question here is a left brain dominant society or culture Luciferic? What do you think?
I think in the sense that you've built up to it over many hundreds of pages, the notion that
a completely left-brained society, I can't call it culture, but a society would have almost a Luciferic intelligence to it. And something that you've also said, and I remember this from The Master and the Emissary, you were saying historically there's been two situations where we've completely succumbed to that: the end of the Greek, the Greek civilization, and the end of the Roman. But now possibly the peril is even greater now.
Yeah. So again, we're trying to alert ourselves to the problem. It's interesting because one of the things that I've done during this podcast is look at Francis Schaeffer's work, and he really does compare America today. Well, of course, it was in late 1970, early 1980, America of then to Rome, 2,000 years ago, and is this sort of left brain dominant society just going the way of Rome, or is it even more profound today?
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure that I'd go so far as to say that I wouldn't really know enough to be able to say that what I know of the end of the Greek civilization and the end of the Roman civilization were exactly Luciferic, or that a Luciferic force was unleashed. But I think that the narrowness, the sort of paucity, the poverty of thinking that comes from the left hemisphere and its obsession with only one value, that of use and power.
That only one value, that of use and power. Sounds Luciferic. Sounds like take the fruit, right? I want to get to a part, so I'm going to have to skip a little bit, and I do apologize. It's sort of annoying.
You see civilizations control only a kind of machine thinking, even in an era when machines were not that important.
That was the problem that the teacher in the Wall Street Apes post said. Oh, we've given these kids tools, we've given them machines, we've given them these devices, and now they think like machines. Yeah, because you gave them the wrong tool. The first tool that you're supposed to give the emerging generation of young people. We do this to little babies. We give them stories. That's the first tool. So the problem is not technology. The problem is that you have the wrong technology and you're misapplying it.
Starts to become manifest in those cultures and the things that they had. But I do think that now there is something Luciferic. I mean, I don't want to sound, as people say now, sort of woo-woo about this, but I've got to be true to experience. I think in my life I've come across evil, and I don't think that it's in any way adequate to say that it's just an absence of good.
Okay, so this is actually touching on the same principle that Joe Rogan was touching on. So Ian McGilchrist, right here, he's saying, I've seen evil. I've seen it. And just to explain it as the absence of good, to sort of explain it in a philosophical sense, doesn't have the explanatory power. There's a cosmic battle going on. There's something more to this evil. And why it clings to me and my soul also. But Joe was basically saying the same thing. It's like, okay, we want to give one miracle the Big Bang, but does that have the explanatory power? You might as well believe in the resurrection of Jesus at that point. If you need one miracle to explain things, you might as well allow in all the miracles because it doesn't have the explanatory power. And so, I didn't really want to end on that sober note. We can, here, I tried to get a little bit of a sense of what Martin Shaw's, what is meant by Christian mythopoetics. Christian mythopoetics, this is just from Grok, as articulated by mythologist Martin Shaw, is an approach to Christianity that emphasizes its mystical, imaginative, and narrative dimensions, viewing it as a living dream or a mythic framework that resonates with the soul's deepest longings and the wilderness of existence. There you go. That's the wilderness place that we find ourselves in the darkness that cannot apprehend the light, cannot comprehend the light, the evil that even Ian McGilchrist is talking about. Shaw, as a storyteller, as an Eastern Orthodox Christian, interrogates his lifelong engagement with mythology and folklore. Integrates his lifelong engagement with mythology and folklore into the enchanted understanding of Christianity, seeing it not as a rigid doctrinal system, but as a transformative, poetic encounter with the divine that aligns to the human experience of story, wilderness, and mystery. I think there's something to that. I think there's something hopeful that we have. That is the re-enchantment of the world that we seem to need. Is it not? Is it not? Is it not? All right. So let's see. Where do we go from here? Shall we go? Let's go. I've been trying to explore storytelling with my kids. Let me just do this, because I like to end a little bit on, yeah, there we go. Now, what's interesting, we just talked, I think I can close all of these. I'll just put this at the very end. I think I can close all of these. But, McGilchrist just brought up the topic of pain and evil in the world. And so let me, I can point you to this video. Suffering is not our enemy. And one of the people I used, one clip that I used there was from from Dan Allender. And he talks about how stories heal. There's a healing nature to stories. So I hope you guys are doing well. I'm going to run back up, catch up on some chat. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Almighty Om, thanks for being here. Evan, risen, not rising. I add Shaw's Bard Skull to my to be read list. Yeah, Bard Skull, The Wild Twin, Smoke Hole, I think is the first book I read from him. The Wild Twin would be an interesting one based off of this conversation. Let me see if I can get this chat hot here. Like my father was a millwright and a mechanic and never fixing our vehicles. Interesting. That is mythos, stories that we tell and live. Yeah, we're meant to embody them. And I think that's part of Dan Allender's project, is that part of the healing process of stories is there's an embodiment to it. And of course, we, to embody the great myth, to embody the sort of myth made fact, follow the story of Christ. You see his story in your story. You can locate yourself on the map of reality. And so you're not dismayed when conflict, bewilderment, and trauma inevitably comes. The kids are not engaged. The passio, all-consuming passion for knowledge and growth. Yeah, clearly children can sense on some level that their education has become detached from reality. Yeah, detached from the lived experience. Do you feel the gospel? The other one would be like, you have to live it. You have to find a way to live. And I think you do that even with math and English and everything else. I appreciate how you built to this point. I got to bounce. All right, man. I'm sure that was like probably 30 minutes ago. Yeah, be in love with the stories I share with him. Love it. Love it. That's so good, man. Pass the stories on to the kids. I agree. The missing piece is you will see my faith through my works. Yeah, parents and teachers with passion. Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is it's not even like we try to be generative. We just are generative. So the seed grows. How does the seed grow? Not by me trying to force the seed to grow. No, maybe I prepare the soil. Maybe I attend to the growth of the plant and all of this other stuff. But it wants to grow. So we want to embody this. We want to see evidence of the gospel lived out in our lives. I want people to look at me and go, oh, there's something different about that guy. Like, what is it? Oh, it's Jesus. I mean, we even see that in the disciples in the beginning of Acts. It was obvious that they'd been with Jesus. A tori is a gate in Japanese. Satori is insight. Is that Michael Satori? Tori is any space that you live in liminal. It's not the space that transforms. That is within. The kingdom is within. That is a good observation. That is a good observation. But are we ambassadors to that kingdom in some way? The already but not yet kingdom, maybe, which would make it still kind of liminal. But I do see that. Yeah, it's the space within. The left hemisphere views the microcosm and mistakes. Views the microcosm and mistakes it for the whole. The right hemisphere sees the microcosm and lets the microcosm arise within. Left hemisphere views the right, the mythos, the forest, the song. Left, the map, the leaf. Yeah, the notion together, the journey, the tree, the music. The notion together. Yes. Oh, journey. Okay, so you would have a forest and a map, right? Okay, that's good. Truth is not found in the part nor the pattern, but in the interplay. The parts as seen through the pattern is revealed in the part. Well then, till I'm a mythopoetic Christian. Maybe we are. Deuteronomy 5:29, we have the skill in God as the heart. All right. Let's check it out. Maybe we'll end with some scripture. We will end Deut 5:29. Oh, that they had such a heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it may be well with them and with their sons forever. Yeah. Yeah. Pass it on. That's the generative. That's the generative and the regenerative. Why? Because the commandments live in the heart. It's a living word. Again, it's generative. We don't force it to come alive. It just does, and it does its thing. It transforms. And that is an encouraging thought, I hope. And so I will leave you all with that. Thank you again for hanging out. Sorry I didn't engage with chat there for the middle part of it. I have to work on how I'm doing these live streams, and I might do a live stream where I'm essentially recording clips, but also a live stream where I can be a little bit more engaged with the chat. So thank you guys for being here, and I will catch you in the next one. I'm going to hang out in chat for a second. I'll leave you with this.